Let's get started. Thank you for joining us for Uncovering What Does Not Work in Substance Misuse Prevention with Erin Ficker and Chris Reed. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes PTTC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services. I'll share a few housekeeping items with you. If you have technical issues, you can individually message me, Rebecca Buller, in the chat section at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, however, we want you to use the Q&A section. If you use the chat, it's very likely we'll lose them because the chat scrolls by so quickly. So please put those in the Q&A section. And Jen Winslow is here and she's going to help us monitor both the chat and the Q&A. For captions, use your Zoom toolbar near the bottom of your screen and choose Live Transcript. AI note takers are not allowed in our trainings, and if we detect one, we'll ask you to disengage. If you do not, we will remove you from the Zoom room. And finally, certificates of attendance will be sent out via email to those who attend the session in full. Now I want to turn things over to our presenters. Erin Ficker serves as a prevention manager for the Great Lakes Prevention Technology Transfer Center, and Chris Reed is the co-director of the Great Lakes PTTC. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for getting us started. Great to have you all here today. I'm looking forward to talking with you about this issue that I feel very passionate about because I don't feel like we talk about it enough in the prevention field, that we talk a lot about what are effective strategies, but we don't take much time to talk about what research has shown are not effective. So thanks for taking the time today to be here to talk about this. I see many people already doing this in the chat. Feel free to go ahead and post where you're signing in from and what your role is in prevention or another field. All right, here's the plan for today. First of all, we're in this welcome and introduction. We have a few things to say before we jump into the meat of things. Then we're going to move into talking about the goal of prevention and evidence-based effective prevention and strategies, as well as ineffective, how we know that. Then we're going to move into really the meat of this presentation and talk about ineffective and effective prevention strategies. We're going to take quite a bit of time to do that. And then we're going to end with strategies for promoting effective evidence-based strategies. This is a super important part of this because we can know what is effective and ineffective, but if we can't move our community towards effective strategies, then this information isn't too helpful. So that's a key piece of today, is to talk about how we can move towards promoting effective strategies within our communities. All right, and here's a warning for you all. We do have some pop quizzes for you. So we're going to see how well Erin and I are doing at conveying this information. And we're hoping you will really take the time to focus solely on this. I know it's so easy in webinars to be pulled in different ways. You know, things pop up on our screens, but if you can try to close everything out so you can just focus, that will help you on your pop quizzes. All right, so let's take a few minutes to talk about prevention, because we want to make sure we're on the same page when we're talking about prevention during the webinar today. So with the prevention that we're referring to today is primary prevention. We are doing things before a problem exists. So here's some examples on the screen of other things in our world that deal with primary prevention. We have immunizations that prevent diseases. They aren't taking care of somebody after they have a disease. We have lighthouses that prevent shipwrecks. It's not taking care of the ships after they've wrecked, but preventing it. We have software on our computers to prevent viruses from getting on our computers. Again, not taking care of it after they're on there. And of course, sunscreen helps prevent, I lost the word. Erin and I were talking today about losing our words, but it helps prevent sunburns. So Similarly, we're talking today about substance misuse prevention, of putting things into place, putting strategies into place that will prevent substance misuse from ever happening. So our goal for primary prevention, as we're going to be talking about it today, is to put effective measures in place before there's a problem. This, of course, helps save time, energy, money, as well as lives in terms of if we can go upstream and take care of things instead of waiting to take care of them downstream. Not that it's not important to have those pieces in place, because we need to have those pieces like treatment and recovery in place. But for the conversation today, we'll be talking about this upstream piece. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks. I'm watching just this amazing amount of people from all over the country come in. So welcome and thank you. And so, like Chris said, we're going to jump into a little bit about evidence-based, the importance of evidence-based prevention. So we know in prevention that success truly does depend on implementing effective strategies. We can have all the greatest plans in place. We can have all the best intentions, but in order to be successful, the best way we know how to do that is to focus on the implementation of effective strategies. And there's a little bit of delay. And we have a continuum of evidence to understand what we mean by effectiveness. We have guides that can help us with that. This, you'll see here, we have these three layer levels, and I will get into them in just a sec, but I do want you to know this comes from a larger CDC table of evidence that helps us understand evidence. And what I want to focus on today, and what we're going to talk about today, is that there's unsupported and harmful programs or practices that have been deemed to be ineffective or that they actually cause harm. So those are the two categories that we think of when we think of unsupported or harmful. There's also this area in the middle of promising directions. They're emerging. There's some evidence, and we've seen some evidence of effectiveness. They're expected that they will get there, but it's not yet fully determined. But then the gold standard at the top, well supported, found to be effective, based in research, well supported. And that is where we are going to focus today. Oh, in these two areas. And we're really going to talk a lot about what we know to be ineffective. Not to focus on the negative, but it's helpful to know so you know what you're looking for. In prevention, one of the evidence-based approaches that we all use is the strategic prevention framework. I'm going to regret saying this in a minute, but in the chat, give me a yes if you are familiar with the strategic prevention framework. Just throw a yes in the chat if you are familiar. Okay, so a little bit, a lot of folks I've seen. Wonderful. The strategic prevention framework is a strategic planning process that we use in the prevention field. It can be used really anywhere, but in prevention, we really focus on this model. We find that it is necessary for us to ensure that we are implementing the best. Oh, Chris, there's something that's popped up on the screen. You're muted. You're muted, Chris.
Sorry, something weird what happened with my computer. I'm going to share one more time. I apologize.
No problem. It gives me a time to
All
count all
right.
those yeses. No, I'm never going to count them all.
All right. Is that working okay now?
Yes, I see
Okay,
it.
I'm sorry. My computer just was not happy for a moment.
It happens. It happens. So thanks for that, for bringing us back. So the strategic prevention framework is the way that we use data to make decisions. We plan for our interventions. And so the 5 steps in the center, the assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, evaluation, you may be familiar with, and this is what we're going to focus on. Just for a second, because it's this model that helps us identify effective evidence-based interventions that we select. So where does it belong? Where does program selection work happen in the strategic prevention framework? I will tell you, you may be surprised to know that it actually that button does not advance your slides, Chris.
There it
Um,
goes.
in assessment, we collect data that helps us to select the right programs. We build capacity that helps us to make sure that we have the capacity to select the best programs. I know a lot of people are saying planning, and really that's truly where that selection happens, where we get with our coalition and with our partners, and we start to make actual decisions about what program we're going to use. But without assessment and capacity, we wouldn't know. We also need to know what we can do in implementation. And in implementation, we continue to look for, in implementation, we continue to assess our program selection and make sure it's still on point. Evaluation helps us with program selection, making sure we've been effective in our past work, and also making sure that we're doing sustainable and culturally competent or programs that then help us create that selection. So the trick answer is that in every step of the SPIF, we are thinking about program selection, but you are not wrong in knowing that it is in planning where the bulk of this work happens. And it's really where you're going to dig into this work. So in step 3, we have planning where we prioritize the risk and protective factors that we've gathered in assessment. We're going to look at effective evidence-based programs, and that's really that strategy. That's really the strategy selection, and it's where we're going to develop those comprehensive plans that we've used data to help develop. So that's where it really does happen, is in that planning phase. So before I move on, are there questions about anything that Chris has brought forward, anything that I've talked about the use of the SPIF?
I wanted to point out something I forgot to mention at the beginning is that we do have a workbook for this session, and we also have PowerPoint slides that are already up on our products page. If you registered before yesterday, you got an email pointing this out, but if you did register more recently, please know that. And Jen and Rebecca have been putting that in the chat, or I believe it's just Jen. So there's a link there if you're looking for the PowerPoint slides and or the workbook. And
Thank you.
otherwise, Erin, I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A at this point.
Wonderful. Thanks. So yeah, I
But
think we've just been exceptionally clear.
yeah, and
But
Dion likes the owl, and I agree.
oh,
I love the owl. Thanks for putting
thank
it in
you.
there, Erin.
I love it. I don't know. I agree. Thank you. I'm glad others agree. So if you have any questions, go ahead and add them into the Q&A, and we'll keep an eye on that as we go. So, but it's time for pop quiz. Pop quiz number 1. So I feel like it's pop. We're going to ask, what is the most important reason, right? No, what's the most important reason that we implement effective evidence-based strategies? And you can just go right in there and answer the question. So is it to meet funder requirements, to ensure we do no harm, to bolster community support, or none of the above? Wow, so many people answering this so fast. This is fantastic. Oh my gosh, I love to see this. And let's see what we came up with. Do I get to see that? Well, it looks like the vast majority of you got the
We'll go
answer
ahead
that,
and if we end the poll, and Rebecca can share the results, and then everybody can see.
oh, great. Wonderful. So the correct answer, as you see there, is to ensure that we do no harm. All these other things that we've listed to bolster community support might be a great reason, but really the answer we're looking for here is to ensure that we do no harm. So good job, 69% of our answers were correct. Okay, thanks for taking the time to help us on those quizzes. And I'm going to turn this over to Chris to get us started into
All
some more
right.
exciting stuff.
Great. Thank you. All right, so let's move into the next part of our agenda of talking about effective and ineffective prevention strategies. Erin and I want to make sure that we convey to you the mindset we hope you are all in for this next part of the training. There are many communities across the nation who are implementing many of the strategies that we will share. And we want you to know that we are not sharing this information to shame you in any way, to do any kind of guilt trips, any kind of judgments. We know that there's a lack of information about this. And so communities are unknowingly implementing a lot of ineffective strategies. So please know, as you're going through, if you're like, oh no, that's something I do, oh gosh, that's okay, because this is the knowledge we hope you can take then and start moving towards more effective strategies. I know when we first did this presentation a few years ago, there was something that I'll talk about a little bit later, but I was like, oh no, really? That's ineffective? I didn't know that was ineffective. So it's only through more information that we can do better, right? So please, we're not here to make you feel bad. We're just here to help you move towards more effective prevention. All right, with that in mind, let's go ahead and move into the category of education strategies. And let's first focus on something that's a favorite of many, many, many communities, and that is assemblies. So a lot of school assemblies happen around our nation on various topics, but including substance misuse prevention. But what we do know through research is that they are not effective. They might have some short-term impact occasionally, but nothing long-term. You see here on the screen some of those main points. But it's interesting because assemblies often make adults, policymakers, communities feel good, like they're doing something. And it's also very tempting because you get all the kids in one room and you get it all done at once. It feels very cost effective. So they're very, very appealing to us, and we want them to work. But unfortunately, we do know that these one-time events are not an effective use of our time, our funds, and can have some harmful impacts depending on what presentations are given. So first ineffective strategies, we would include assemblies. Next, this is something else I know many communities have been doing. And so again, we're talking about for primary prevention, we found that personal testimonies, somebody who's in recovery, who comes and talks about their experience of going through the addiction process, what happened, etc., that this is not something that has shown to be a preventative effect for substance misuse. Lots of things going on here that, youth and young adults, often that first bullet point, they view themselves as indestructible. This is the thing where, I have two sons in college now, and I remember with my younger son talking to him something about a danger and, talking about, please don't do this because you can get hurt. And the words that came out of his mouth was, well, that would never happen to me. And I was just like, no, it's just like, it's so stereotypical. But it's so true that their brains, especially the boys' brains, that prefrontal cortex, really understanding that, making the good judgments about what risks truly are in their lives, it's just not in existence at this point, to the degree at least that we would want them to be. So these kind of stories where people talk about going through these challenges and then of what led them into the path of addiction, those kind of things. It's often in their minds what's going on is, well, that would never happen to me. I could use something and I would never, get addicted, things like that. So we know that that this is not an effective strategy in that way. The other challenging part with personal testimonies is it also overlaps with many other ineffective strategies. For example, they're often one-time events, they're often assemblies, and there are often many other things we're going to talk about shortly, including, I wrote them down, so I wanted to remember them all. Fear arousal, where I'll often focus on fear arousal in these kind of speeches, reinforcing exaggerated substance use norms, didactic delivery, knowledge only information, etc. So as we go through these different things over the course of this webinar, you'll see how they often build on one another and are intertwined. So while we put these as separate things, they often have multiple things going on. Erin, is that what you were going to share as well?
Absolutely. I also wanted to add, and just kind of address a couple of things I saw in the chat, is that the research that So this is all based in research, and the little numbers there at the top will direct you to the reference points in our research and at the end of the document. But the research is about prevention. So personal testimonies could be, like someone asked, good at addressing stigma. That's not what we researched. What we researched was about the effectiveness of prevention and reducing substance use. So I can't speak to whether or not it's true that it helps to reduce stigma. I can speak to the fact that it has been shown to be ineffective in reducing substance misuse. So I appreciate the question. I just want to make sure we were clear about our research and about kind of the research question, if you will, that we had a specific focus, and that's what we're presenting today.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. And that's something else that I didn't point out as I started this section, that at the top, you see the 8, 10, 11, 20, 21, et cetera. Those are the citations to the studies that focuses on why we have the conclusion that these personal testimonies don't work for primary prevention. And those are, when you download the slides, you will see at the last 4 slides are all the citations that you can refer these numbers to. You know, when we first did this presentation a couple of years ago, we didn't include that, and that was a request you all had. So we made sure to put on every slide the citations of what they correlated to the references. All right, thanks, Erin, for chiming in on that. Let's go ahead and move to the next one. Something else that's really popular across our country are mock car crashes. And this is where, for example, before prom, they will, on the football field, reenact a car crash that has happened due to driving under the influence, even with kids, you know, hurt and, you know, with blood makeup on their faces, and you know, going through the whole traumatic event of it as the mock car crashes. And again, this is research has shown that there's little to no lasting impact. It can also, like it's on here, it can be traumatizing for those kids who have had experiences similar to this, or just who are sensitive to these kind of things, because they're usually very graphic with, you know, cars that have been in accidents that are there. So really quite lifelike or real life like reenacting. The other interesting thing with this is research found that it can actually increase risky behavior, and it's even more effective among those individuals at higher risk. So again, getting back to the, it would never happen to me, I can use and drive just fine, you know, all those kind of things. Again, when we're talking about youth and primary prevention, this has not been shown to have the impact that we would hope it would. All right, another one, very popular, drunk goggles. And these are where you communities purchase goggles that when the kids put them on, it simulates being drunk. And then, for example, they'll have in their gym, they'll be on the scooters, and they're supposed to be on the scooters and making their way around a course in the gym. So the challenge is that, first of all, there's little to no term impact in terms of this kind of a strategy, but also often if you talk to the kids after they're done with this, they're like, oh, that was so much fun. And they're laughing and they're like, oh, that was so great. Or, and the other thing I heard is if you close one eye, then you can do the obstacle course just fine. So is there a lesson there that if you're under the influence, if you close an eye and drive? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. The research wasn't on that, but it made me wonder. But again, it's challenging because many communities have purchased these and they can be very expensive. I've heard, you know, like $8,000 for sets of goggles. So then the communities are like, well, we've already invested in this. How can we stop doing this? And so again, that's a challenge that we're going to talk about a little bit later, is how to move communities away, even when there's been investments in these kinds of strategies. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what are effective education strategies. So talked a lot about what are ineffective strategies. What about effective? So there's some examples here on the screen. We often, I'm guessing many of you know about social and emotional learning curricula that are in schools often. Things like parenting education programs where you bring the parents and the kids together, and it's really focused on talking with youth and supporting youth. So it's not, again, it's not just like a pamphlet given to parents, but it's a whole curriculum and education program. Lots of different curriculums exist that have been shown to reduce risk factors and enhance protective factors known to impact substance misuse. And we're going to talk about where you can find some of those resources a little later. Age-appropriate information delivered over time. So again, moving away from those one-time events, but doing things over time in a way that's developmentally appropriate for each of those times that it's delivered. And long-term education campaigns, again, with focus on with a focused goal and audience that's really, again, tied into reducing risk factors and enhancing protective factors. All right, with that, Erin, are there any questions or that you're seeing or anything else?
There are a slew of questions, and so which I think is wonderful. I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to hear it keep coming. Some of these are, I want to just kind of be really clear, are really specific questions about, is this specific strategy that I'm doing effective, or does it fall under the ineffective? And we can't speak to every single program if it has a component that's similar to this, or it feels like it might be one of these. I would encourage you to kind of look at the research that we have, the research articles that you have at the in the resources section, and to the document that Chris shared, so that you can kind of dig a little deeper, or to talk to the developer of a program that you're using. Someone asked a really great question, and I am not going to be able to go back and find it, or maybe I can, maybe I just did, about are these effective, ineffective as a standalone strategy, but could be effective as part of a greater comprehensive approach. And so, Chris, I wanted to have you think a little bit about that and share a little bit about that.
So absolutely, if this is one component of a comprehensive program, and it also doesn't include the other things that we know are not effective, like fear arousal, we're going to talk more about specific components that are not effective. So again, depending on for example, the type of assembly that it is and who's speaking and on what topic, and is it going to lead into some skills development that's going to happen within the classroom? Is there a parent component? All those kind of things. Possibly, I would say possibly, but you need to be really thoughtful about what your goal is by having that one assembly. Are you anticipating that will take care of it, or is that just going to be one component that leads into a bunch of other things?
Yeah, and I think the key to noticing when we talk about in assemblies, one of the primary reasons they're ineffective is because they are only one-time presentations. So if they are a larger piece of the approach in your community, that's probably fine. If you're doing them as they do in my school district, as like a one shot, and they're like, see how we got everyone in and we did this, then it's not going to be effective. They're not harmful as much as they are ineffective. And so we'll kind of try to separate where we know things to be harmful versus just ineffective. And I think, the questions about being part of a comprehensive plan, I just love to hear that, because that means you all are thinking on multi-dimensional ways about your prevention and how it exists. So just keeping in mind that some of the notes there, such as the reason assemblies are effective, is largely because they're kind of that one shot piece of information that doesn't have a lasting impact. So I just thought I'd speak to that a little bit.
Great.
There are so many other questions.
Yeah, and
I'm not
I'm looking at it, and I know we have a very large group of folks today, so I'm anticipating that there will be a large number of questions that we won't be able to answer during this time. But I'm thinking that we might be answering some of those questions in the upcoming sections. So I'm thinking at this point we should go ahead and keep moving, and then we can come back at the end of, we'll try to touch on questions that are specific to each section that aren't going to be covered later, but we'll do our best to answer those questions as we go along. Does that sound good, Erin?
Absolutely. I love that.
Okay.
Okay. Well, so we are going to move on to the next category. Oh, see, I did it and I did. I'm gonna go back. Our next category of um, excuse me, of strategies is around media strategies. And I want to be clear that media strategies are in some ways, they're the strategies that we do, things like communication campaigns or educational campaigns, but we're also just referring to, and the research we did here was around media. So how you communicate through media and multiple media challenges. And that's everything from a poster I put up in the middle school to a YouTube video that we posted, a PSA that runs on the radio or on TV. All of those components kind of in between there are the different ways we think about media. And some of those, sorry, I got distracted. Some of those strategies some of the media it says I'm speaking too quiet. Can you guys hear me? Can
We
people
can
hear
hear
me?
you.
Okay, the subtitles said they couldn't hear me. Okay. Um, anyway, so a lot of the media strategies or the media work we do actually also is part of either a comprehensive strategy or they actually overlap with some of the other strategies we do, like environmental strategies. And so we'll get to those just as we continue. I just wanted to touch on that. Okay. So one of the things in media, in communicating our messages through media that we have know to be ineffective are fear, arousal, and scare tactics. And this is broadly known to be ineffective, and that often the messages as are studied are found to be ineffective or because they're not developmentally appropriate and can scare um, or can have the kind of a backwards effect, right? And be not appropriate to convey the message behind that scare or fear arousal for kids younger or folks who are not intended to see that. So especially when you're thinking about big media, like if you're going to do billboards across the country or across your state, think about who's seeing that. Who's seeing that billboard, and is it developmentally appropriate for a fourth grader to see that, or are you really trying to get to a very small audience? So often they're really not, they're really not effective, and can actually be harmful in some cases. And and this is something that Chris kind of alluded to with the speakers and the one-time events. One of the things that we risk doing in prevention is to no longer be seen as a trusted source. So if we tell people that if you take meth, all of your hair is going to fall out and you're going to end up, in a, end up in a horrible situation, you're never going to make it into anything, all of these things that we say that could happen, that what a youth may hear or even an adult may hear, like, well, I know someone who's done that, and that's not what happened. So their experiences are contrary to the message you're sending, and they're likely to not listen to you, right? And then we start to really undercut in a bigger way than into just that specific media. We start to undercut our credibility as being trusted sources of information. And I think that's really important to note that sometimes we are protecting ourselves as prevention providers and as professionals to make sure that what we're doing continues to build trust in the community. So again, they're really also very appealing. People love a good scare tactic. They love a good fear arousal. And the thing that is hard is that kids love them. And you'll hear people say, oh, well, I know, but like our kids love them. And we did this poster contest and they drew these themselves, right? I was in a school and they had done a poster contest and the kids, they had voted on them, and the ones that won were all across the board. They were fear arousals. One of them was just a graveyard, and like, if you drink, you'll die. That might be that might be what that kid had in their mind, but that doesn't make it a good message. And just because they like them doesn't make it good. So I want to just be really clear. My kids love Doritos. Much to my chagrin, they love Doritos. It does not make them good for them. Just because they like it doesn't make it good. So I know we hear this all the time. Oh, they love them. We love them. Oh, the community loves them. So it gets back to that, like, I feel like I'm doing something, adults like them. So just remembering that even though sometimes that's our reaction, that's not necessarily, that doesn't make it effective. Okay, so reinforcing exaggerated substance use norms. This is important because the opposite is really true. Again, anything we're doing to exaggerate norms or make it seem as if this is everyone's doing this can have that same effect of being counter to people's experiences and actually change their perceptions. We don't want to change them from a positive perception to a negative perception. Again, that loss of trust in our prevention messages is really is real. And because that our norms, beliefs, in our perceptions can lead to increased substance use, it can actually be really harmful. So we just want to be careful in those instances when we're communicating through our media messages where things are happening and how they're happening, that we don't lead to this idea that it's and this is the norm and it's happening everywhere. So, and I think a lot of our old media way back, for those of us who remember in the 80s and the early 90s, kind of did this exact thing. Was to create that everyone was doing it. So definitely not an effective approach. But what we know to be really effective in our use of media is really having positive effects of no use, right? To say, we know that when you don't use, these are the positive benefits. So highlighting the positive and then the normative messages that really help people see the norm of peer use and actions. And it's almost true that you're going to see the majority of youth and of folks are actually not using. And so the more we can reinforce that message, the better. So keeping these messages and this media that we're putting out there to be positive, to be positive, to focus on normative measures. And again, this kind of gets back to who's seeing this, who is our audience. And so the more we put out positive messages and the positive effects of no use, we're really getting the message out there. And it's a really important component of making sure that our media is seen in our communities, and that we're building strong relationships. Excuse me. So all that being said, it's time for, you guessed it, another pop quiz. So we're going to bring up that same poll and we're going to scroll down. You're going to have to scroll down a little bit past that first question. Oh, no, you're not. Never mind. Are we in the right place? Yeah. Okay, sorry. I'm not good with polls. So for each of them shown here, go through them each and tell us if these are an effective or ineffective strategy. So mock car crashes, effective, ineffective. Social emotional learning curriculum, effective, ineffective. School
And so
assemblies.
people will need to scroll down to see all of them, though.
Yes. Yep. So
Yes,
I'm
be sure to scroll.
scroll. Excuse me. School assemblies focused on the dangers of drug use, media campaigns that highlight a significant increase in cannabis use, or age-appropriate curriculum focused on reducing risk factors. So go ahead and we're gonna take just 30 more seconds. And you guys are quite a smart group, as I see mock car crashes The majority of you are saying ineffective. Strategies for social emotional learning, effective. Indicating, oh, sorry. I have lost my spot. Oh, my whole thing just moved. Wonderful. Research on social emotional learning curriculum is effective. Absolutely. Assemblies that focus on the dangers. You got it. Ineffective. Good job. And media campaigns highlighting that cannabis use has increased are ineffective, remembering that that is highlighting something that's not the norm. While it may be increasing, it's not the norm, and it's not showing a positive message, which we know positive messages are really important. In media, I want to be clear, I'm not saying you can never tell people that things aren't going well. You can never highlight that, marijuana use is on the increase, but it's important to make sure that in our media communications, we're sharing that positive normative. And then age appropriate curriculum on focusing on risk and protective factors, effective. Very nice job. Wonderful. Okay, well, we'll pause for questions in a minute, but I want to turn it over to Chris to take us into our next section.
Okay, and I'm going to share the results again because
Oh.
I realize we need to click a little box right here that says show correct answers to all. I'm seeing in the chat that people were not seeing them. So I was looking around fast. I just saw the little box. Can you all see them now? Okay, great.
Okay,
All right,
so
so that's
sorry, we also closed those fast, but it's just a pop quiz. You're not going to be graded on this. But so we appreciate you guys wanting to be on top of that. But yeah, don't worry if it closed too fast for you.
all right. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next section. We are going to move into information sharing. So let's talk first about knowledge-based interventions. So these are the kinds of strategies where it is simply sharing information, more the didactic kind of information about what drugs do and the effects of drugs. So it could be where you have something like I was told about in one community, they had one of those metal rings, that kind of empty metal ring with the index cards on it, and each index card had a drug name on the front of it, and on the back of it had what that drug does. It makes you sleepy, it makes you stay awake, it causes weight loss, whatever it might be. So that's what they were giving kids to. It's like, hey, don't do these drugs because these are the things that they can do. The challenge is with kids' wonderful brains is they're like, oh, so this drug is in my grandma's cabinet. I could take that and I could lose some weight. I can take this and I can do that, etc. So we know through research that by giving them information about what each drug does actually can increase the likelihood of use. So these kind of things where we're sharing the drug fact sheets, the effects of drugs, where you're simply saying, that these things happen if you take this drug, have not been shown to be effective. All right, the next one, myth busting. This is an interesting one. This is the one that when I first saw it, I was like, what, really? I always thought that the myths and facts kind of things, we see them everywhere. I always think gosh, that's got to be an effective thing. But what's interesting about it, and it says here on this first bullet, is that it brings the myths to the forefront and makes them more memorable. And we often do this. For example, I just saw something recently where a college had something about a myth about cannabis use, and I not remember exactly what the myth was, but it was in like large font was the myth, and then the truth was like 4 paragraphs of information. So guess what? Guess what's going to be more memorable to our brains? It's the bolded myth information. And this information comes from what's called the illusion of truth effect. And I'm going to read this because I love the way it's phrased. So the illusion of truth effect is commonly held beliefs and repeated statements are easier for the brain to process and are therefore perceived to be more truthful than the new information that comes in. Isn't that interesting? I'm going to read that one more time. Commonly held beliefs and repeated statements are easier for the brain to process and are therefore perceived to be more truthful than the new information. So basically, myth busting is myth reinforcing. So that's why we want to stay away from it. So instead, we just want to state the facts and we want to reinforce those. Don't even put the myth in before the fact. All right, so what about some effective information dissemination strategies? So it's probably going to sound pretty familiar to the other ones, right? So in terms of, we want education related to risk and protective factors. So again, looking at what kind of knowledge, information sharing that we are doing that can show how to reduce, or that can reduce risk factors as well as enhance protective factors. And things like, if it's information, if you want to share information, and again, this can be a component of an effective strategy, you want to make sure that there's action-focused information. So for example, if you were wanting to share information to help reduce driving under the influence, some things that could be action-focused information could be providing materials with phone numbers for car services and taxis. It could be providing talking points for how to talk with friends about having a designated driver. It could be providing a script that you could use to memorize and use if you find yourself in a difficult situation around being in a position of possibly getting in a car with somebody who's under the influence, or how to prevent somebody from getting in the car who's going to drive, who wants to drive. So it's those kind of things of getting the information instead of just don't drink and drive. It's okay, don't drink and drive, and here are the steps you can do to help prevent drinking and driving from happening. So hopefully that's a little bit clearer in terms of what we're talking about with the action-focused information. And I see Sheila just put in the chat that, in other words, sharing information about what to do rather than what not to do. I love the way you phrased that. Thank you. That's great. All right, environmental strategies. Let's talk about these for a little bit. So these are the strategies that we put in place to help change what's going on in a person's environment, in our communities. The broader environment is what we're looking at. We know there are many effective environmental strategies, and we will talk about some of those in a minute. But there are a couple that we want to point out that research is not showing evidence that they are effective. So let's talk about those briefly. One is punitive approaches. So these are the things where there's punishment for when kids are caught using substances. Again, many studies have shown no effectiveness of this approach, as you see on there. And in this case, and this is hard because, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. So we've got the zero tolerance approaches and the punitive approaches. And when you're looking at the research, they often lump them into one thing. So teasing out which, I was like, I'm not sure what to put on each side. I had them combined at one point, but they're really two different things. So bear with me and understand that these are going to overlap these two slides a bit. So what we found is that both of these strategies can actually increase the risk of substance misuse. And for what's talking about in what we have here in that last bullet, that things like suspensions or other punishments that happen can actually increase the risk for substance misuse. For example, if they're suspended in this, if that's the punishment, the punitive approach, that they're suspended from school, then what are they doing during that time that they're suspended? Are they at home not being monitored? Are they gone with some other kids who are also suspended who are likely to have more high-risk behaviors going on? So those kind of things, that suspensions or those other punitive approaches can actually increase the number of risk factors in these kids' lives. So let's go into this next one with the zero tolerance approaches. So again, so the overlap here, suspension and expulsion do not treat the underlying problem of substance misuse and can actually increase the likelihood of it. So again, this is where the zero tolerance approach is. A kid's caught using, they're suspended. That's it, zero tolerance. Nothing's going to happen. By doing this, I included this second bullet here because I found this really interesting, that, and sad at the same time, but interesting, that up to 40% of school suspensions are due to repeat offenders. Does that sound familiar in terms of that this is not a helpful strategy if they're repeating over and over? If they weren't repeats, then it would be more of an effective strategy, right? That we wouldn't see the repeat offenders. So again, that next part, for these students, suspension ceases to be punishment, and the repeated suspensions may often contribute to dropping out of school entirely. I'm guessing this is not a surprise to any folks here. So again, when we're looking at both punitive and zero tolerance approaches, especially within the school systems, when we're looking at primary prevention, or even indicated and falling within that are indicated approaches. If you're familiar with the Institute of Medicine's different parts of prevention. So we need to look at alternatives to these approaches. Oops, excuse me. So I'm just going to leave it at that. We can go on, but there is more information on the slides. Again, if you're wanting to look at the research behind, there's the citations at the top. But let's talk about what kind of strategies that are considered environmental strategies that are effective. And again, there's a lot of them. Here's a few examples. Some examples include advertising restrictions. So this is, where can people advertise? Can they put big billboards up right next to the school, talking about that there's a cannabis shop that they can access? And things like changing the hours and days of sales. So restricting the time of sales and restricting the number of hours that establishments that sell alcohol and tobacco has been shown to be effective at reducing the amount of use in a community. Changing conditions of availability. So this is when we talked about the density of retail outlets, it's the number of retail outlets within a community. So it's the number of permits that are given for alcohol establishments within a community. Access at social events. So for example, if there's a community fair, a large community event, if there is alcohol served, then it's only in one specific location. People can't buy it and then carry it around the whole event. And of course, restrictions on prices and discounts is like on the happy hours, or like in college environments where, dollar drinks from 5 to 6 or whatever it might be. By reducing the amount of discounts that can be done, or the types of discounts, can have an impact. Compliance checks, in terms of, are people selling to minors? Economic interventions, we see that when we raise the price of alcohol and tobacco, we see the use drop. So we see an inverse relationship. The higher the cost, the lower the use. And social host ordinances, in terms of if they are hosting a party where alcohol is served, what kind of impacts can you have if something happens, if you're serving youth, if there's a driving under the influence accident following somebody leaving your event, etc. All right, threw a bunch of stuff at you. Erin, anything you want to share before I jump into the last quiz, pop quiz that we have for you all?
No, I think you are doing a great job, and there's lots of questions, and again, kind of getting to all of them is a little overwhelming at the moment. So thanks for putting those in there. We will try to get to them when we have a minute. This is a complex area, this environmental strategies. So feel free to keep coming with the questions and the comments. I'm having a harder time following the chat, but I promise I'm looking at the question.
Okay,
Nice job,
great.
Chris.
All right, so let's go ahead and do this last quiz. And again, a similar format, make sure you scroll down. And I saw in the chat before that it would be helpful if we're just quiet. So I'll stop talking while people are doing this. All right, about 15 more seconds. All right, if you weren't able to finish, that's okay. Just follow along as we go through them. We'll go ahead and end the poll and share, if we could, Rebecca. All right, so let's go through each of these. So first of all, the strategy of normative messages regarding peer use is effective or ineffective. The correct answer is effective. So again, that normative use, so this went back to the section that Erin was talking about in terms of media campaigns. So well done, 66% of you. Indicate if research has shown the strategy reducing the availability of alcohol and tobacco is effective or ineffective, well done, 93%. If we reduce availability, it decreases the likelihood of substance misuse. Well done. What about myth busting? Well done, ineffective. We know that by sharing the myth, it reinforces the myth versus the fact. So we want to avoid myth busting as a strategy. And last, zero tolerance school policies, effective or ineffective. And again, well done, 92% of you said ineffective. And again, because it's not getting at the root of the problem and we're actually increasing the likelihood of other risk factors in these youth environments by having these policies in place. Well done, everybody. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. And I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Erin.
Thank you. Good job on the quiz, y'all. So we've gone over just a lot, and in a short amount of time. And in seeing the questions that are coming up in the Q&A and the comments in the chat. Oh, I didn't mean to go forward again. Thank you. Sorry. One of the things that I think is helpful for me when I look at this information is to think about what are the things or the components or the parts of strategies and programs or the ways that they're implemented, the characteristics of them that make them more or less effective and impactful. And so when we go to implement something, if it's a larger program, we can find something within that that might have been identified as ineffective, or we might be able to see a piece of it that might actually be harmful. So one of the things we want to do is also think not just about individual strategies, or not we don't just want to think about the strategies, we want to think about the components of them that can make them more or less effective. So ineffective, the characteristics of programs. And I want to be clear that there are times, this is to say they're less effective. So for example, programs that are for caregivers and parents only are less effective than those where youth are also involved. So youth and caregivers are part of the program. So there are a number of parent curricula that have both youth and caregivers involved. And those have been shown to be much more effective than when we just have just parents or caregivers. So if we have a limited amount of money, limited amount of resources, we'd want to go for something that we know to be much more effective, which would be that model. Didactic delivery systems. So anytime we're just talking at people, anytime we're just having a one-way conversation. So that's one of the reasons why we know that assemblies aren't great, because it's a one-way street, not an involved conversation over time. So things where we're involved in a didactic delivery, just spewing out information. Things that are developmentally inappropriate. And this is really important to keep in mind, because we may be doing a strategy that has content that is developmentally appropriate and is written for high school students. But if we're doing that in a middle school, right, we've changed that program audience and it's becoming less effective, or even in some cases it can be harmful if we're putting it to a group that is not that it's not intended for. So there are times where we would change the way that we implement a program or adapt it. And this might be familiar with thinking about adaptations. You want to make sure that those adaptations don't cut in to any or create any instances where we're doing program characteristics or components that are ineffective. So it's important to think again about if you have a limited amount of resources, making sure that we're focusing on the right developmental population. And then if we're grouping together youth at higher risk. So this is a complicated one, and Chris, you can jump in if you want to. But when we're grouping together youth at high risk, we tend to see that it becomes less effective or even ineffective because we're not getting those positive messages across. So this is one that I'm less familiar with, but Chris, if you wanted to jump in and add anything.
Sure. Yeah. So when you group together a bunch of youth or even adults at higher risk, then the norms of the group tend to be high risk norms. So the reinforcing of, hey, this is a good thing to do, that the peer pressure becomes peer pressure to do high risk things. So it's again, you're raising the likelihood that the group of youth that are in there have many risk factors amongst themselves. And so that's good. Again, it's kind of like the combined effect is going to raise that risk even more.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, for clarifying. And it's important to note that there are cases where having higher risk youth together is maybe the approach because you're doing selective or indicated populations. Would you do those in a group? That's something you want to think about as a component and look at evidence-based strategies for those populations. So we're not saying that you never work with higher risk youth, but that thinking about making sure that the programs that you're selecting are for that audience and are appropriate for that audience. Okay. So if we know these are the things that we do in programs that make them ineffective, what are the ways that we can implement programs and the characteristics of programs that make them effective? Oh, the slides and I are in a fight. We're in a pretty big fight. Okay. So the program characteristics that we know that are effective. Building social and personal skills. And I want to focus here on building skills. So we're not just giving information, we're not just telling them what the skills are, but we're really working in like a long-term way through curriculum to build skills. So we also know we talked about some of those fear arousals don't work, but we do know that immediate consequences as opposed to long-term consequences are more effective. So when we communicate to youth, especially that smoking will make you have bad breath or keep you out of the room because you can't be inside and smoking, be with your peers. It can turn your teeth yellow. Those kinds of things are really immediate. If we talk about, the risks of liver cirrhosis, of lung cancer, those are really far out. And so youth don't think that anything bad's going to happen to them. And they also don't think about the future very much in terms of how their decisions today will impact them tomorrow. So we know that immediate consequences are much more impactful. So as you think about your programs, think about, are we citing those immediate consequences? Positive norms, I feel like we've really talked about this in some of the other areas. Focusing on positive peer norms is really essential, and also correcting misperceptions. So we're going to tell you these are the right norms, but we're also going to correct the incorrect norms. So we're going to make sure that we're focusing on not everyone does this. This isn't how, not everyone in our community drinks at these events. So we're going to focus on correcting misperceptions, involving youth in peer-led components. I saw there were comments that flew by really quick. People talking about having positive experiences with peer-led and peer-to-peer prevention efforts. And the more you involve youth, the more likely you are to have an impact. So it's a great approach, great component. It's not possible in all the things you're doing, but it can be really effective. Using interactive approaches again, so this is it, that includes skill practice. So anything that's skill based, skill building, really much really builds the longevity of the message and of the skills. So having an opportunity to practice, we know, is important. So with that, I think we're going to not do questions right now because we have too many.
Well, I thought I'd just cover a couple really fast. And then because I wanted to make sure everybody heard the responses, then what we will do is we will take these questions and as best we can, we will write up answers to them and we will send those in a follow-up email to you all. So, because you all have great questions. So I don't want to not answer them, but a lot of these, we won't have time because there's so many of you. So we will do our best to do that. But one thing is, somebody asks, what are ways to adapt ineffective strategies that would make them effective? For example, turning an assembly into a series of workshops. My recommendation would be to actually start with an evidence-based effective strategy versus trying to create your own. So again, we'll show you some resources of how you can find effective strategies. Creating your own is a lot of work, and it would require you having some really good evaluation built in to be able to find out if you have put something effective in place. And another one was, what about social media? Are we going to talk about that? And we aren't talking specifically about social media, but all of these strategies that we're talking about apply to social media. So for example, reinforcing exaggerated norms, don't do that through social media. Fear arousal, don't do it through social media. Look for ways to build people's skills when we're talking about moving to action-oriented kind of information. So you can take all of these things and apply that to the work that you're doing in social media. And I think I'm going to stop at that unless you see anything, Erin, that you think we need to look at before we move on.
No, not that I can answer quickly. Nope.
Yeah.
They're really good, really involved, complex questions, which is great, but hard to get to quickly.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So again, super important here. This part of this is we've talked about what are ineffective and effective strategies. How do we get our communities to move towards more effective strategies? This is the key because people can get very, very set in their ways with prevention that they become very passionate about what they're implementing, feeling like, okay, I know you said that it was ineffective, but I know in the heart of my hearts that it is effective. I hear that many, many times. So again, what are some things that we can do to help move people forward toward more effective strategies? So we have a few steps here for you to take to do this. Oops, I forgot I was going to ask you some questions first. So I'd love to see in the chat, why do you think, I mentioned a couple reasons, why do you think why do we continue to implement ineffective strategies? If you could put that in the chat, I'd love to see your thoughts. Sunk cost fallacy. Yep. Easier. Yep. Routine, historical. We've always done them. Tradition, financial investment. Absolutely comfortable, afraid of change. Excellent. These are all the reasons that I've heard so many times of why over and over we continue to implement these strategies in our community. I started working in the substance misuse prevention field in the early 1990s. I'm a prevention dinosaur. Several of these strategies, or many of these strategies that we talked about, we knew back in the 1990s did not work, and we are still using them. So we've got to move past these things of why we are so entrenched and continue to implement these strategies. So I think you've already said all these, but these are some of the things that we came up with. Perception that the interventions are liked by the audience. And again, as Erin said, just because we like them doesn't make them good for us, just like cookies or Doritos. Partners are not open to change. So again, somebody who's very invested in it can make it hard to change. Partners insist on implementing despite the evidence. Individuals feel the strategy worked for me. That is something else that happens over and over, that, for example, somebody will say, well, I went to an assembly when I was in high school or middle school or whatever, and they scared me to not ever use, whatever it might be, that one of these strategies that we said were ineffective. Well, the reality is, it's very likely that that person was probably already at very low risk of misusing substances. So by having that assembly, it just reinforced all of the protective factors that were in place in their life and or the lack of the risk factors in their life. So just by saying it worked for me, well, do we really know if that was the thing that worked for you, or if that's the perception that you had in your mind of what was going on in your life? So that's something else that can be hard to overcome. And also, of course, a concern regarding capacity and our costs, which I know many of you mentioned in the chat as well. All right, so let's talk about how to move forward. We have 5-step process for you all. Gotta have steps and process, right? we felt like having some structure around this would be helpful for you. Hopefully it will be. So first of all, you want to identify why your community is invested in the ineffective strategy. So all those reasons you all gave in the chat, you need to figure out what's going on in your community. Let's say that your community continues to implement a mock car crash every time before prom. What is it about that event that is keeping your community wanting to do it? Is it a lack of information about the ineffectiveness? Is it because, gosh, it gets great media attention? We always get on the front page of the newspaper. It's really a great way to get our prevention out in front of everybody. Or is it because there is one group in the school that is responsible, and that's the one thing they do each year? I heard about this from one preventionist, that was the only thing that they planned every year. And that's what they had done for years and years and years. So that tradition, the history, the knowledge, not wanting to change, those kind of things. So identifying your why is the first step, super important. So then next, we want to find evidence-based strategies that are effective that could be implemented in their place. So what could be some options that you could present to this group, to your community, whoever it is that you're wanting to shift them away from an ineffective strategy? Find out what options exist out there that we already know through research are effective. Next, you want to brainstorm how the change could benefit those who are invested in the ineffective strategy. So once you find the different effective strategies that might be possibilities to implement within your community, think about those who are invested in the ineffective one. What might be appealing to them about the effective strategies? Is it that it might be more cost effective compared to the mock car crash? It might be that it will get more investment from the community to be doing a more comprehensive program. It might be the data that you can show, gosh, by implementing this, look at the level of effectiveness of this program and how many lives we can save with effective primary prevention. Whatever it might be, find out what could be the benefits of the effective programs for these folks, what they would perceive. All right, then create a message to persuade these folks to embrace replacing the effective strategy. This is where really thinking about how to approach this topic. I know I'm a conflict avoider. I don't know about you all, but I'm definitely a conflict avoider. So thinking of going into a meeting where I'm going to have to try to say, hey, you know that program you love and you've done for the last 20 years, we shouldn't do that anymore. That's going to be a very challenging discussion. So please know, as we lay this out, we aren't saying this is necessarily easy to do, but if you do these steps and if you really are thoughtful about this message that you're going to create and how you're going to share this information to get them to buy into the idea of this other effective strategies, that could be very helpful. And I would say you can even practice if you're nervous about doing this, practice with a partner, with another colleague, with somebody you Zoom with, across the country who's on here, and you see that they're here, and you can connect with them that way and practice with one another. But creating that message and practicing so that when you can do this next step, which is actually meet with those who are invested in the ineffective strategy. So identify, find, brainstorm, create, then meet. All right. So I'm gonna go back real fast, make sure we want to identify why your community is invested in the ineffective strategy. You want to find alternatives to that are effective. You're going to brainstorm the benefits of moving to the effective strategy. You're going to create your message and practice, 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 and then you're going to meet with them. All right. Erin, anything to add to this before I move on from here?
Sorry, I have a hard time unmuting it. No, I think you're absolutely, you covered it all. Absolutely. I think we got it. It's a
All
lot.
right. Great. So I would love to see like the thumbs up emoji that you can do that it goes up the screen, or the heart. How are you feeling about your ability to move through these steps within your community? Or it can be a down if you don't feel confident. If you could go ahead and do the emojis, I'm curious to see how people are feeling at this point. People know where to find those emojis that at the bottom of your screen that you can click on.
Looks like a
I'm
lot.
starting to see. There we go. They
A
were
lot.
buried. I had my my other screens to chat over it. Great. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up, but some are crying. Does that mean that you're like, no, don't make me? I'm curious what the crying is, or
I
the oh one is that like you're really scared?
I
Put in
think
the
they're
chat.
laugh
How are you
crying,
feeling about
happy
this?
cry. It looks like happy crying, maybe.
Is it happy crying or is
I
it
think
sad
that's what I
crying?
saw.
Okay, I'm seeing joy. Melissa says joy. I love it. And Gertrude looks pretty happy about it. Okay. Uh, how are you? If anybody wants to explain in their how they use that emoji, that would be great. Depends on the community. Some are pretty set in their ways. Yes, and it might be a slow process. It's not that tomorrow you're going to get people to change, but it's something that over time, if you can work people towards the more effective strategies, um, absolutely, it can take time. Don't feel like you need to go out and tomorrow this needs to happen, or even next month. It's going to be a process over time to kind of wean people away from these strategies and get the effective ones in place. Sheila says most of the reactions in Zoom are positive. Is that a self-fulfilling prophecy that we only give you access to the positive ones?
So
And somebody said there are no negative emojis in the reactions.
oh, I'll have to check
Oh,
for that.
that's so interesting. I wonder if we need to build that in. That's not helpful if we're trying to gauge people's reactions and you don't have the range of emojis. So I'm sorry about that.
So I want to just comment on one thing I saw in the comments, and there are tons of things, but this is one thing that really stuck out at me. And someone said, this is going to be really hard because of the community I live in, right? Whether that's, whatever the characteristics of your community are, yeah, it's really difficult. And it's not all or nothing, right? If you can't get people to stop the mock car crash, can you get them to agree to something also that's effective? Can you help them start to see the impact of the effective? So you might not be able to like get all of it done in one go, but can you make movement in one way or the other to reduce ineffective or increase effective? We know that it can be difficult to change these ideas, to do it overnight. Some people just don't want to change, but can you make changes in small ways? So think about that. Don't be overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, I have to take this research and I have to change everybody's mind and we have to stop doing these things. But think about how you can make more effective, um, more positive prevention happening in your communities. I heard people mention comprehensive approaches. Can I do this as part of other things? The more you're doing, that's not entirely true, but putting together a comprehensive plan and making sure that you're really coming at prevention from a lot of different angles is going to make it more effective. And so the more you can add things, I think the better you'll be. If you're just doing one strategy and it's one of these ones that we've said is ineffective, adding other strategies will only increase your effectiveness. So I just wanted to yep, it's hard. Get it. take little wins.
Great. Thanks, Erin. All right, I will hand it back over to you.
Oh, thank you. So bottom line, like, right, what's the bottom line? And the bottom line is, if the ladder is not leaning up against the right wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place faster. And I think this is important when we think about prevention, when we think about the work that we do. We have limited resources. We have to be data driven, and we have to be outcome focused so that we can use those resources the best. And if we take our resources and lean them against the wrong wall, we won't be able to be impactful, and we won't be able to see outcomes. And when you don't see outcomes, you lose support. So let's lean that ladder up against the right wall, and let's take a step towards more effective prevention. Use our resources and use our communities to build better, stronger prevention. So I just want to think about, not focusing on what all the things we said that don't work, but think about getting yourself to the right place and doing that and reaching those outcomes and getting to that place. If you're leaning your ladder against the right wall, you're going to get there. So I just wanted to remind everyone of that and help you guys focus on thinking of how to do this effectively. And so I'm going to just, glad everyone likes the quote. So we want to ask about thinking about what you're going to do with this. So people are already kind of, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? This is really hard. So there's little things, right? So taking little steps. What actions will you take in the next 24 hours? So what can you commit to doing in the next 24 hours? And we're going to give you some options, right? Some things to think about. Oh, one, have a water cooler chat. Like talk to a colleague. Like, hey, I went to this webinar. You won't even believe what I heard. It's crazy. It's great. Read what research shows does not work. So that document, there's a link. We'll share that link with you. Absolutely a great read, kind of get you some more background. My goodness. Review strategies that you are implementing. So take that time to kind of look and see what is the evidence behind what you are implementing, right? So engage your colleagues or coalition members in a discussion on why your community invests in ineffective strategies. So that's that first step in that 5-step process. So are you going to start a conversation and trying to get to the bottom of why? So there's a slide deck in our learning portal that you can use to share this information with your colleagues or your coalition, your communities. It's a really cool tool so that you can have the same information and those same resources to communicate that in your community. Oh, I'm having a real hard time with this. Okay. Explore online registries. So we have a link here. And again, there are online registries that show you what effective prevention strategies are. I saw someone asked, how do I know how I can find an effective strategy? And I saw that question come up somewhere. And the answer is online registries are a great place to look for them. And then another thing you can do is to create a plan, right? So think about how you can move from an ineffective strategy to an effective one. Maybe think about those 5 steps. Maybe think about what are the things you could do to add on effective strategies or reduce ineffective strategies.
Great. And we'd love to hear in the chat or see in the chat what your plan is to do, because we know if you do nothing and don't have any plans for action, the studies show that you will lose 50% of what we've talked about within an hour, which is really sad to think about our adult brains. But
I mean,
so if you have a plan for action and do things like have the water cooler chats or talk with other folks about this information, the likelihood that you will retain this information and be able to move to action is going to be much greater if you do something really soon and not wait, because we have busy lives in our professional and personal lives. So making sure we have a plan for action makes a big difference.
This is great. I'm seeing
Thank you.
kinds of great great plans for moving forward in the chat. So thanks, guys. I'm going to turn it over to
Great.
Chris again.
All right, so just a few more things to make sure that you know about. We have an additional resources slide. So again, these PowerPoint slides, the participant workbook, and the lit review that we referred to in this for this presentation, all are available on the product page on our website for this webinar. And that's where the recording of this will also be posted within the next 5 days or so. So access the lit review that what research does not work in substance misuse prevention. Go to our portal page, the what does not work portal page, and that includes the slide deck that Erin mentioned. So in that slide deck, you'll look in the facilitator notes, and that gives you some ideas for talking points on each slide. And on the ineffective slides, I also copied and pasted the part of the lit review that applied to that slide. So if you want to read the lit review actual language, you'll see that in the facilitator notes on the slides. Also, Erin mentioned the guide to online registries. Highly recommend looking into that. And then also there is a webinar that I did for the whole PTTC network on online registries. So if you aren't familiar with using those, you might watch that webinar to get some tips on how to do that. All right, few last things. We've got a couple more minutes. Wanted to make sure you know about some upcoming events that you can have access to. One is on the 27th of February. So this month, we are going to have a webinar on reviving youth survey participation. We know that's been a big challenge for many of you. So join us if that's something you want to learn more about. We are also holding coffee breaks, networking opportunities for substance misuse prevention professionals. These are 15 minutes long. So if you want to come join us for a really quick session to get to know somebody else in the prevention world, please join us for that. We have one last deep dive into prevention code of ethics for this year. We are not going to do any more until 2027. So if you need a couple more hours for your continuing educations for your prevention certification, be sure to join us on March 6th. On March 11th and 13th, if you are a supervisor of folks who work in the substance misuse prevention field, or you have a supervisor who supervises you, a preventionist, I encourage you to sign up for the training on March 11th and 13th. And last but not least, we have Brian Klaas, who hopefully some of you have joined the other webinars he's done for us. He's an amazing presenter. He is going to talk with us about telling stories with data and data visualization on April 22nd. Highly recommend that you join us for that webinar. If you haven't already, I would love if you follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. This is the way we get information out to you every day. We post at least once a day on business days to try to get information to you that we hope will be helpful for you with your substance misuse prevention work. And last but not least, after you close out of here, you will be redirected to a GIPR evaluation form. We would love for you to take a couple minutes to fill that out so we know how well this worked for you. What worked, what didn't. I read every comment, so please know that it doesn't go into a black hole, that we take that information and find it very valuable to help us plan future events. So with that, Rebecca or Erin, do either of you have anything you want to add?
No, I don't.
I just thank you for all your questions, and we will do our best to get back to you on those. I think they were really helpful in the way we think about everything. So thank you for providing that and being here and engaging today.
Yes, thank you to you all. And a huge thank you to Rebecca and Jen for being on the back end of this very large group. I know we had over 400 people on here. So thank you for all the work that you did on the back end. Greatly appreciated. And Erin, it was lovely to present with you again.
Same.
All right. Take care. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.